In the name of the one who gives light to the mind and rest to the heart, let us begin with a question that has troubled seekers for centuries. What happens when reason, the proud lantern of the human intellect, begins to doubt everything it once believed? What happens when the very tool we trust to find truth suddenly becomes the source of uncertainty? Imagine standing in a dark valley at night, holding a small lamp in your hand. That lamp is your reason. For a long time you believe it is enough to illuminate the path ahead. But one evening a strange thought arises. What if the lamp itself cannot reveal the entire road? What if the path stretches beyond the reach of its light? This question once shook the soul of Al-Ghazali, one of the greatest thinkers of the medieval world. He lived in a time when scholars believed that reason alone could uncover the deepest truths of existence. Philosophers studied logic, mathematics, and metaphysics with unwavering confidence. They believed the human intellect could climb the ladder of knowledge step by step until it reached certainty. Yet, Al-Ghazali began to notice something unsettling. The more people relied solely on reason, the more they disagreed with each other. Philosophers argued endlessly, each convinced that logic was on their side. If reason was so powerful, why did it produce so many contradictions? He began to question not only their conclusions, but the very foundation of knowledge itself. Can the senses be trusted? Our eyes show us the sun as a small disk in the sky, yet we know it is vast beyond imagination. Our ears hear echoes and illusions. Even our perception of time and space shifts depending on our state of mind. If the senses can deceive us, perhaps reason, which depends upon those senses, may also lead us astray. Al-Ghazali turned inward, examining the structure of certainty itself. He wondered, how do we truly know that something is real? When a person dreams, the dream feels completely convincing while it is happening. In the dream, we see landscapes, hear voices, and feel emotions as vivid as waking life. Only after waking do we realize it was an illusion. But what if our waking life is simply another level of dream? What if there is a higher awakening beyond it? This realization did not bring him peace. Instead, it plunged him into a deep crisis. Imagine the ground beneath your feet suddenly dissolving. Every belief you held begins to tremble. Logic itself no longer feels secure. The intellectual world that once seemed solid now appears fragile, like a castle built upon sand. Al-Ghazali described this period as a moment when doubt spread through his mind like a sickness. And yet he did not reject reason entirely. That would have been too easy and too careless. Instead, he treated reason as a traveler treats a map. A map can guide you through a city, but it cannot replace the experience of walking through its streets. Reason, he realized, is a tool, powerful, necessary, but limited. It can lead us toward the truth, but it cannot grasp the deepest reality on its own. Here lies the revolutionary insight that would change the course of philosophical and spiritual thought. Al-Ghazali proposed that reason and faith are not enemies fighting for dominance. Rather, they belong to different levels of understanding. Reason can analyze, compare, and argue. Faith, however, perceives something that lies beyond the reach of pure logic. It is like a light that suddenly illuminates the entire landscape, not just the small circle revealed by the lamp. To understand this, imagine two people standing before a mountain at night. One person studies the mountain using a lantern, carefully examining each stone that falls within its glow. This is the work of reason. The other person waits until dawn, when the sun rises and reveals the entire mountain in a single moment. This is what Al-Ghazali believed faith could do. It does not destroy reason. Instead, it completes it. But such an idea was dangerous in his time. Philosophers believed they had built a system capable of explaining everything, from the motion of the stars to the nature of the soul. To suggest that reason had limits was to challenge the intellectual pride of an entire civilization. Yet Al-Ghazali was not motivated by rebellion. He was motivated by a relentless desire for certainty. He was searching for a form of knowledge that could not be shaken by doubt. So he continued his journey, examining every path available to the human mind. He studied the theologians who defended religion through debate. He analyzed the philosophers who trusted logic above all else. He observed the mystics who claimed to experience truth directly through the purification of the heart. Each group offered something valuable, yet none seemed to provide the unshakable certainty he sought. Gradually, a profound realization began to emerge within him. Perhaps the deepest truths cannot be reached by argument alone. Perhaps they require a transformation of the one who is searching. Just as a mirror must be polished to reflect light clearly, the human heart must be refined to perceive truth without distortion. This thought marked the beginning of a journey that would change Al-Ghazali forever, a journey away from the crowded halls of debate and toward a more silent, inward path where reason would remain a companion, but no longer the ruler of the search for truth. Leaving behind the noise of intellectual pride, Al-Ghazali began to ask a far more unsettling question. What if the greatest obstacle to truth is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge? In the great academies of his time, scholars debated endlessly, constructing elegant arguments and dismantling the arguments of others with equal skill. Logic was sharpened like a blade, and victory in debate often felt like victory over truth itself. Yet Al-Ghazali observed something deeply troubling in these exchanges. The intellect could prove a point today, only to refute it tomorrow with the same precision. If reason could defend opposing conclusions with equal strength, could it truly be the ultimate guide? He realized that reason, though powerful, behaves like a judge who must rely on witnesses. Those witnesses are our senses, our memories, and the assumptions we inherit from the world around us. But what if those witnesses are unreliable? The judge may be brilliant, but if the testimony is flawed, the verdict cannot be trusted. This realization slowly reshaped his understanding of the human mind. Reason is not an independent ruler standing above reality. It is a servant working with the limited information it receives. For many thinkers, this discovery would have led to despair. If reason is limited and the senses are uncertain, then where can certainty be found? But Al-Ghazali did not stop at doubt. Instead, he began to see doubt as a doorway. Doubt, when honest and sincere, clears away false confidence. It strips the mind of arrogance. It humbles the seeker. And in that humility, something new becomes possible. He started to notice that the greatest truths in life are not always reached through argument. Think of love, for example. A philosopher can analyze love endlessly, defining its causes and effects, measuring its psychological patterns, describing its emotional movements. Yet none of those explanations can replace the experience itself. The one who loves knows something the analyst does not. The knowledge is direct, immediate, and impossible to fully translate into words. Al-Ghazali began to suspect that the knowledge of the divine might operate in a similar way, not as a theory constructed by the mind, but as a reality perceived by the heart when it becomes clear enough to receive it. This idea did not reject reason. On the contrary, reason still had an essential role. It could protect the mind from false beliefs. It could expose contradictions and illusions. But reason could only prepare the ground. The seed of certainty had to come from somewhere deeper. In reflecting on this, Al-Ghazali often compared the human intellect to the eye. The eye is an extraordinary instrument, capable of perceiving shapes, colors, and movement. Yet even the eye cannot see without light. In complete darkness, the most perfect eye is useless. The intellect, he believed, functions in the same way. It is capable of understanding many things, but only when illuminated by a greater light. That light, he argued, is what faith provides. But faith in his understanding was not blind acceptance. It was not the passive belief that one adopts without reflection. For Al-Ghazali, true faith emerges after the mind has exhausted its search and recognized its own limits. It is the moment when the seeker realizes that reality is larger than the frameworks of logic alone. Instead of closing the mind, this realization opens it to a deeper form of awareness. To illustrate this, imagine a traveler crossing a vast desert. At first, the traveler relies entirely on maps and calculations, measuring distances and directions with careful precision. These tools are valuable, even necessary. But eventually, the traveler encounters a guide who knows the desert not through maps, but through lived experience. The guide understands the hidden wells, the shifting winds, the subtle signs written in the sand. In that moment, the traveler discovers that knowledge can take different forms. One is analytical, the other is experiential. Al-Ghazali believed that the mystics of his tradition possessed this second kind of knowledge. They were not merely discussing truth, they were experiencing it. Through discipline, reflection, and the purification of the heart, they claimed to perceive realities that could not be captured through argument alone. At first, Al-Ghazali approached these claims with caution. After all, the mind must guard itself against illusion, but the more he studied their lives, the more he noticed something remarkable. Their knowledge produced humility instead of arrogance, peace instead of conflict, clarity instead of confusion. This observation planted a powerful idea in his mind. Perhaps the search for truth requires not only intellectual effort, but moral and spiritual transformation. Just as a dusty mirror cannot reflect light clearly, a heart clouded by pride, ambition, and attachment may distort the very truth it seeks to understand. And so Al-Ghazali reached a conclusion that would have seemed radical to many scholars of his time. The crisis of reason is not solved by abandoning reason, but by placing it within a larger journey. The intellect can guide us to the edge of certainty, but it cannot cross the final threshold alone. To cross that threshold, the seeker must become something more than a thinker. The seeker must become a witness. To become a witness, this was the final transformation that Al-Ghazali believed every true seeker must undergo. The intellect can analyze the path, describe it, even defend it in argument. But witnessing requires something different. It requires the presence of the whole being. Mind, heart, and soul must move together. Al-Ghazali began to see that many people spend their lives standing at the entrance of truth while endlessly discussing the road that leads to it. They debate the shape of the path, the texture of the stones beneath their feet, the theories of travelers who passed before them. But very few actually begin the journey. And the tragedy, he believed, is that knowledge without transformation can quietly turn into another form of ignorance. He observed that the human mind is remarkably skilled at building systems of thought. We construct philosophies, ideologies, and arguments that appear solid and complete. Yet, these structures often become walls rather than windows. They trap us inside our own explanations. The intellect begins to admire its own brilliance, forgetting that its true purpose was to guide the seeker towards something greater than itself. For Al-Ghazali, the turning point came when he realized that certainty is not merely a conclusion reached by reasoning. It is a state of the soul. A person may possess thousands of arguments and still feel restless, still feel uncertain. Another person may have very few words, yet possess a deep tranquility that cannot be shaken. Where does that tranquility come from? He believed it arises when the heart becomes aligned with reality itself. When the noise of pride, fear, and attachment begins to fade, a different kind of perception becomes possible. Truth is no longer something we chase with arguments. It becomes something we begin to recognize quietly, like a familiar voice returning after a long silence. In this sense, faith does not silence reason. Instead, it liberates it. When reason accepts its proper place, it becomes clearer, sharper, and more honest. It no longer pretends to explain everything. It becomes humble enough to admit mystery. And paradoxically, that humility allows it to see further than before. Imagine once again the traveler with the lantern in the night. For a long time, the traveler believed the lantern was the only source of light available. But when the sun finally rises, something remarkable happens. The lantern does not become useless. It simply becomes unnecessary. The traveler can now see the entire landscape in a way that the small circle of lantern light could never reveal. This is the harmony Al-Ghazali envisioned between faith and reason. Reason walks with us through the night, guiding our steps, protecting us from falling into error. Faith, however, is the dawn that reveals the fullness of reality. And perhaps the deepest lesson of his journey is this: doubt itself can become a blessing. When doubt is sincere, it destroys false certainty. It humbles the mind. It forces the seeker to move beyond comfortable assumptions. But if the search continues with honesty, that same doubt can open the door to a deeper form of knowledge, one that is not built only on arguments, but on clarity of the heart. In a world that often glorifies endless debate and intellectual victory, Al-Ghazali reminds us of something quieter and far more profound. The ultimate goal of knowledge is not to win arguments. It is to transform the one who seeks. So perhaps the real question is not whether faith and reason are enemies. The real question is whether we are willing to walk far enough to discover how they complete each other. And if this reflection made you think, if it opened even a small window in the way you see knowledge, truth, or faith, then consider supporting this journey of ideas. Give this video a like, share it with someone who enjoys deep philosophical reflections, and subscribe to the channel so our community of seekers can continue to grow together.